Into the wild I'll go, and into the wild I am. It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home. Into the wild I'll go, and into the wild I am. It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home.
Welcome to the Freebirth Society podcast. This is a radical space for women who are ready to celebrate their autonomous choices in birth, motherhood, and beyond. Together, we'll learn about wild birth through personal narrative, we'll explore the politics of birth, and we'll analyze everything that relates to our lives as women from a feminist perspective. Here's your host, Emily Saldea.
It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home.
RBK Grad and brave, brilliant woman, Amelia, is on the show today to share her big stories. Amelia has really moved the needle big time in her life, from being initiated into motherhood with 2 entirely unnecessary, traumatic C-sections to moving beyond the medical paradigm entirely in her subsequent births. It is a painful story, full of trauma, medical midwifery betrayal, a desired VBAC turned repeat C-section, and then Amelia has a spontaneous, undisturbed early birth, a miscarriage, completed at home. This is when she realized the stories she was told were lies, and that she, in fact, was entirely whole and capable of birth. Amelia stepped into who she really is, choosing free birth, choosing herself. Amelia took the Radical Birthkeeper School to help her integrate the big work of her birth trauma and in choosing free birth, and you can too. The doors are open now until April 14th, and this is the only round we're offering this year. The school got a facelift. It's new and improved. I can't wait to see who's ready for what we have to offer you. It's never been more accessible either. We're now offering payment plans as low as $249 a month, and we have over halved the price. So there's basically no reason not to join in and let us blow your minds. What we share on this podcast is just the beginning. You know, if you're here, you're binging these episodes, you know you're so into it. So join us in RBK and let us usher you into the depths of sovereign birth work. Even if you don't really want to actually attend birth, this is the program to begin understanding who you are, who you can be within this revolution taking place, within the sovereign birth paradigm. So go check out our gorgeous new website, www.radicalbirthkeeperschool.com. Check out what the students all have to say, look at the curriculum, and then sign up, and I'll see you in April. All right, enjoy this episode. It's a really good one. Welcome to the show, Amelia.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
I know, it's so fun. It's kind of a long time coming, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So I know you through the membership and you took RBK, and I know a little bit about your birth experience history, but what prompted this invitation was seeing your beautiful new announcement of now your 4th.
Yeah.
Amazing. Oh, and I met you at MRF, obviously.
Yep.
Yeah. So give us some context. Tell us who you are before your first birth. And yeah, I mean, what we're here to talk about today is that you had 2 C-sections in a row, right?
Yep.
And then went right into free birthing. So such an important story for women to hear, because so many women think, okay, maybe 1 C-section. Okay, yeah, maybe I could birth at home. But women contact me all the time. Oh, I've had 2, so no way. So take it away.
All right. So yeah, before my first son was born, I would say, moderately enmeshed in the medical system. I mean, I've always been like a questioner of norms. So like I was like, I'm not going to take Advil, but yes, I'm going to see an OB. So it was just kind of like a weird mid ground that I was occupying at that time. And mostly because I just like oriented from fear so much back then. And that's just kind of like part of my lineage, especially like the women in my family are very fear oriented people. And pretty much every single choice that they make and that I made back then was based on something that I was afraid of. It was never like what I really wanted.
Totally.
So we tried for like about a year. And when we decided to stop trying and bought a house and like got busy doing other things, I found out I was pregnant and like immediately called the OB. And they were like, we don't even want to see you until you're 12 weeks. And that was my first introduction to like all of it. And I was like, wait a second, like thought you were supposed to call immediately. And they would be like, yes, come now. But they like didn't even seem interested, which was like a really weird first start. But I had a pretty uncomplicated pregnancy. And then around the 39-week mark, of course, they started talking about you schedule your, induction now if you go past a certain point. And I was like, no, I read like the birth partner and like Ina May and like stuff like that during that pregnancy, like not very deep, but like I was trying to do my due diligence. And I was like, no, I'm going to go till 42 weeks. Definitely. Like if that's what happens, like I'm not scheduling an induction before that and all the things. And then of course the like bi-weekly appointments started when I was past the 40-week mark and the non-stress tests and the ultrasounds. And basically I was just past 41 weeks. They said that I had low fluid on an ultrasound. And I kind of knew enough to be like, why does that happen? And the ultrasound tech was just like, it just happens. You're just at that point in pregnancy now. And, it just starts to fail. So let me go talk to the doctor. And I sat in the waiting room, like with my mom, because I was bringing my mom to my appointments at that point. And we sat for like a really long time. And then the doctor literally came to like the reception window and was just like, you need to go to the hospital for an induction. They're waiting for you.
Whoa.
And like, that was it. He didn't even bring me into a room or anything. And like, he left and I was just like, okay, I guess we're going to the hospital for an induction. So we went.
That's that real human to human care we are all looking for at the end of our pregnancy.
Totally. I was like, that was so abrupt and like terrifying. Like I'm a first time mom. I was 23 years old. I like had no idea. Like you're not even going to explain anything to me, but okay, let's go to the hospital for an induction. So we did. I didn't like know what else to do.
Yeah.
And the whole time I was like on the car ride there thinking like, I don't want to do this. Like, can't I at least go home and think about it? But like, I was scared and I didn't know what the heck was going on. And I just went with it. So we showed up to the hospital at like 9 a.m. and they basically forgot I was there until mid-afternoon because I told them that I hadn't eaten anything. So I guess they were giving me the entire day to eat breakfast. And they started doing the induction with Cervidil, which didn't do anything after like 12 hours. And then they did another dose of that and that still barely did anything. I think I was like 2 centimeters and no contractions, like nothing. My body was absolutely not ready at all. And then they decided to do the misoprostol, which I questioned because I had read that it has a lot of dangerous side effects that I was nervous about. And of course they were just like, no, it's fine. It's standard. It's
fine. I mean, it's not FDA approved for this. It's actually the abortion pill, but you should totally take it.
Yeah, exactly. And like, they didn't explain anything to me. And
no, why would they do that? Women wouldn't comply.
Yeah. It's weird thinking back on like how little, like I questioned anything, even though like I had written a birth plan. And then like when I got there, they asked me if I had a birth plan. And I was like, no, because I didn't want them to judge me and like treat me differently for having a birth plan. And the nurse immediately was like, oh, good. I'm glad you're like a go with the flow kind of mom. And I was like now looking back, that's like, ooh, okay, grooming. That was the first red flag in the hospital anyway. But yeah, so I was there overnight. The first night they moved me into a different room in the middle of the night because it was busy, and then moved me back different labor and delivery room in the morning, which was super confusing and disorienting and like really threw me off. And it wasn't a private room, so it was like just for a few hours I was just sitting here in a bed trying to get labor going with like a stranger next to me. It was so weird.
They literally treat zoo animals better.
Yeah. 100%. Like I had no privacy at all. There were multiple resident doctors like coming in and asking if they could do cervical checks, which I just said yes to, because at that point I was just saying yes to everything. And I didn't really I didn't want them to start like flagging me as somebody who was difficult. Like I remember that being in the back of my head with every choice that I was making, like keep them from like getting angry with you so they don't treat you differently.
Wow. That's like total rape culture.
Yeah.
You
absolutely.
know, like, ugh, that's so intense.
And so by like, I don't know how long it had been, almost 2 days by that point, that they did the misoprostol, and it still, I was like 3 centimeters. Nothing was really happening. And they were like, well, we're going to start you on Pitocin anyway, because that's just the next step in the whole process. So I did that, and the contractions actually like started with the Pitocin. And by like evening time of that day, which was 2 days in, I was like in so much pain. The Pitocin was horrible. And they kept increasing it. Like the nurse that I had that day was also awful. She just like would come in and be like, okay, it's time to increase it every 30 minutes. And like, I'd be like, are you sure? Like, I'm really in a lot of pain. This is like getting really uncomfortable. And like, she had like nothing nice to say to me. She would just be like, well, this is what I have to do. And like, keep turning the drugs up.
What's really, really fucked up about it is that her job is exclusively to look at the contraction strip and just get them 3 minutes apart. It has nothing to do with the human in front of her that's saying, whoa, 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 this is too much and let's slow down. Her job is to dehumanize you and just turn the pit up every 30 minutes until she sees the right contraction pattern on the strip. I mean, if that doesn't like encapsulate the disembodiment of obstetrics, you know, what does? Ugh.
Yeah. And she like barely was even in the room. She was like checking it from, you know, like the nurse's station or whatever. And I was like trying to stay active and like bounce on the ball and do all the things that they tell you to do. And at one point she came in and was like, I can't get a read on your monitor, so you have to stop. And I was like, so now I just have to lay here?
Yeah.
And she was like, yeah. Okay. And of course that was way worse, way worse. So I did that all night long, and I really didn't want an epidural. So I was trying really, really hard to just do it as naturally as possible. Like it was so weird where my brain was. Like I was so disembodied and so like I didn't even like feel my baby moving the whole entire time. And it just like I forgot what I was even there for. Like I really like did not even recognize and like make the connection anymore that like I was there to have a baby. I didn't even feel pregnant anymore because of like all the other, you know, like the IV in your arm and all the things like all over your body. It was so disorienting. And it still wasn't like doing anything. The next time that they checked me, I was still 4 centimeters and I was still only contracting with the Pitocin. So thankfully, the only thing that I'm grateful for in the whole experience, besides my child, was that I had one of my doctors finally come in, because I was like only seeing residents of the hospital. I didn't know any of them. finally one of my doctors came in and looked at me and had some sympathy and could tell that I was just like at a breaking point, and decided that we would take a break from the Pitocin for a few hours and let me eat, because it had been 2 days and I hadn't eaten or drank anything.
Which,
And
by the way, when you're concerned about someone's fluids in utero, dehydrating them and
yeah,
starving them is totally the move.
exactly. And I remember asking them, like, could my fluid be low because it's 7:30 in the morning and I haven't drank anything or eaten breakfast? And we're like, no, that's not like relevant. Okay. But yeah, he gave me a break for like a few hours. I finally ate something. I finally felt a little bit better. And then we started up again. And a few hours later that evening, I was like, okay, I'm having an epidural because I just can't do this anymore without it. And I really, really wanted to leave, but my mother was like in and out still. And that was a whole other like side story, because I asked her not to be present for the birth. And I was very clear with her when I was pregnant that she was not to be present for the birth. And she just kind of like kept popping in and hanging around.
Oh.
And I was just so not in my right state of mind anymore to like say or do anything at all about any of it. So that kept really throwing me off, because she was in the room and I was like afraid to say something that she would like think was rude to the doctors, and like it was just a whole other dynamic that like kept me really firmly placed in that people pleasing like good girl frame of mind. And I took the epidural. I finally slept a little. It was almost 3 days of being in the hospital at that point. And finally by the morning I was 10 centimeters dilated. And so one of my actual doctors, a different one, of course, because it's whoever's on call, came in and was like, okay, lay back, put your legs up in the stirrups. It's time to start pushing. And I remember thinking it was like the most uncomfortable, strange position to be in. Like your head is like lower than your legs. And like, it was so weird.
You're like a turtle on your back.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I've never felt like so weird laying down. It was very strange. And all the people there staring at me with my legs spread, which was great. And she coached me to push with the contractions that she could see, because I couldn't feel them anymore, like 3 times. And my baby's heart rate like totally bottomed out. And at that point they were like, okay, it's time for a C-section. And I just like left my body. I just wasn't there anymore. And I remember them like giving me all the paperwork and reading the thing, and like death, like on the like waiver that they make you sign, like risk of death. Like that was like the only word that I could like process when I was signing this paperwork. And I was like, oh my God, they like don't tell you that like what else are you supposed to do at that point? Like you've been there and you've been subject to everything that they're doing to you. And now they're telling you it's an emergency and your baby is going to die if you don't do this, but also you could die doing it and you don't have a choice. So let's go. And like my mind was just like racing. Like I was just like in a spiral.
Yeah. And this is culture's initiation to motherhood. Like this is it. This is the rite of passage ritual that the vast majority of women walk through to enter motherhood. Strip you down, humiliate you, torture you, back you into a corner, an impossible situation, drug you up, numb you so you can't even leave, and then tell you you have to have a super dangerous surgery. I mean, that is some evil ass shit.
Yeah.
Welcome to motherhood. It's so painful.
Yeah. And it's like now having such different experiences to compare it to, and like to see myself on the other side of that, it's startling to say the least, to like think of the difference between how you're left after an experience like that, postpartum with a baby, entering motherhood with that child, even if it's not your first time, like every single time is different, and versus what it's like when you're not subjecting yourself to all of that. But yeah, so they wheeled me into the OR, and I had no idea that your arms get strapped down when you have a C-section. That was utterly terrifying. And I didn't know if my husband was going to come in the room or not at that point, because he's like a little squeamish and he didn't have like time to communicate with me whether he was coming or not before they like swept me away. And so I was just like there by myself thinking like, I'm just like, it's just me and these people, and this is just what it's going to be. And thankfully he did end up coming in, and he was there, which was a little bit of a comfort, but he was terrified too and traumatized and had no clue what was happening. And they did the C-section, and I remember feeling like all the tugging, and oh God, it was just so, I don't know, there's not even like words to describe what that feels like. It's so violating. And we heard him cry when he finally was removed from me. And both of us just like broke down, because at that point, all I could feel was relief. I wasn't even happy. Like I wasn't like processing absolutely anything else at that point, just like utter relief that he was alive.
Over with.
Yeah. Like, I'm just glad he's alive. Like, that's all I can even think about right now. And they like gave him, you know, did the things, weighed him and wiped him and all that stuff, and gave him wrapped up to my husband. And I remember asking them, like, of every single thing that I wanted this birth to be like, absolutely none of it happened. I didn't want drugs. I didn't want to be induced. I didn't want any of it. I didn't want a C-section. Every single thing happened. And I remember asking them, like, can I please have skin to skin right after birth? Like, it's the only thing I'm asking for. It's the only thing like left of what I dreamed of this experience that I could possibly even have. And they were like, yeah. And so like they unbuttoned like my shoulder from the like hospital gown and like unwrapped the baby's shoulder from the blanket, and like had my husband hold him like against my shoulder while I was laying there with my arms strapped down. And that was what they considered skin to skin. And at that point I was just like, okay, this is like, I'm grateful for it, because nothing else could possibly be worse at this point in time. And then something weird happened with the anesthesiologists, like the drugs that they were giving me. I don't know if he purposefully put in a sedative or if that's just standard practice, but
it's pretty standard.
I started to like lose consciousness. And I like told my husband, like, you got to take him. Like, I can't even, like, I'm not even here. I don't know what's happening right now. I started losing consciousness. And I remember thinking, like, is this what dying feels like? Because I was like, people die. I just signed the paperwork. It said I could die. Like, am I dying right now? And they like just aren't telling me. Like, are they trying to save my life? And I don't even know. I have no idea what's happening anymore.
No, they don't like you asking for skin to skin, Amelia.
Yeah,
they don't like you making a request while they're trying to do their job.
I didn't even think about it that way. That they probably did it on purpose because of that.
Of course.
I haven't never even processed that until now. You're right, though. That's absolutely,
I mean, obviously I don't know what happened in your OR, but as someone who has seen a shit ton of surgeries, the sedative, it depends on the anesthesiologist. Some, it's just what they do. But I have rarely seen an anesthesiologist tell the mother on the table, now I'm going to put you to sleep. They just do it. And of course, I've seen it be used as a, you know, they might not see it as a punishment, but I would call it a punishment. And the more demanding and the more, you know, annoying the patient is, shut them up, of course.
Yeah, that never occurred to me until now. And I'm sure that was a large part of it. it was a male anesthesiologist, for whatever that's worth, also.
Nothing.
And so
they're all groomed the same. Yeah, they're all just drug pushers.
And I remember asking him, like, I'm like losing consciousness. Is that normal? And he was just like, yeah, you're fine.
Ugh.
Okay. And so I don't really remember very much after that until like we moved back to the labor and delivery room, which was also the recovery room at that particular hospital, I think.
Like, what do you want to say around how that shapes you, leaves you, and then how does this second surgery come to be?
Yeah. Oof. After he was born, I don't even feel like I was like mentally there for like a really long time afterwards. Like, looking back on it, obviously I was there and living life, going through motions and taking care of my baby and all of that. But I think it was the very first time that I had really been faced with how my orientation to fear running my life had almost killed us. And it took me a lot of time to really process that. And I don't even think that I like fully processed it until after my second C-section and after it happened again, but in a different way. So
how old is your oldest now?
He's 6.
Okay. So this all unfolds in a pretty short amount of time.
Yeah. All my kids are just like about 2 years apart.
Yeah.
Like a few months one way or the other.
So, okay. So in the wake of this first birth, are you like, do you get hip to what a scam the whole thing is? Or are you like where are you? And then, yeah, take us into the second baby.
Yeah. Because I had like done a little bit of natural birth research the first time, I feel like I definitely was like unpacking absolutely everything afterwards in like the context of different birth stories I had started to listen to. Evidence-based birth or something like that has like a podcast or something like that. It was like a podcast by like doctors, OBs. They did like a lot of interviews with medical midwives. And I remember listening to an episode and them talking about how low fluid was not a reason to induce. And I was just like, what the heck? And so I decided, when we decided to get pregnant again with my second, that I was going to have a midwife. And I didn't know anything about any type of underground midwifery at that time at all. I was still, somewhat in the medical model. And we interviewed one midwife. And I felt like really well aligned with them at first. And so we decided to hire them. And during that pregnancy and while working with those midwives was when I first started listening to Freebirth Society podcast. And I just like absorbed absolutely as much of it as possible. And by the time that I was like 36 weeks and still working with the medical midwives, I was starting to really feel like I didn't want them there. And I really felt the call to free birth that time. But because I had had a C-section already, and because I was still very much enmeshed in like messy relationship dynamics with my family members who didn't agree with all of that and were really afraid for me. Like, my aunt is a doctor, and she sent me like the risks of having a VBAC, like statistically, in like an email. Yeah. And I ended up
the risks of having a second freaking surgery. No one talks about that.
No, not considered at all by anybody that I was talking to at the time. And I had to set a really firm boundary with her that I was not talking to anybody besides my medical providers about any of it, which was probably one of the first times that I really had like been super clear with one of those family members on a boundary for protecting my space and my family external to the larger family. And so eventually I was like almost 41 weeks, and I was like feeling sensations a little bit here and there every like night leading up to when I went into labor. We'd set up like the birth tub and like obviously not filled it, but it was sitting in my room and it was ready because I really wanted to try to have a water birth with these midwives. I also had a doula. So it was a team of midwives, 2 women. And then my doula was the team that I had prepared to walk me through this next birth.
Which is like,
And
what, a $6,000 investment?
yeah, it was right about there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a large part of the reason why I didn't decide to fire them when I was suspecting that they were not really in alignment with my choices. Because in those last weeks, of course, they started to take back some of the stuff that they said. I told them that I didn't want any monitoring, that I did not want any cervical checks, that I didn't even want to be asked to have a cervical check because I knew that like in labor, that was going to throw me off. Like, and I would want it because of course, when you're in labor and you're riding every sensation and it's getting intense, you like want to know where you're at. But that's not how it works.
Right. And like, this is an interesting point here because I know there's a lot of smoke and mirrors with these medical agents, but like also, I don't mean to sound whatever, like insensitive, but like you're also asking, you're like what's the quote everyone says? It's like asking for an organic filet mignon at McDonald's or whatever the thing is. Like you're asking them to not do their job. And what gets complicated in that is everyone is on different pages when you do that, right? Because they might be lying and being yes women, which, medical midwives are famous for. So everyone has their part here, but like what gets really fucked up is when you, as the new mom who's just trying to find the right way, is expressing these desires about how she wants to be treated. And when the medical midwife is like, yeah, honey, whatever you want, you're the leader, you're the boss, you don't even realize how much you're barking up the wrong tree because they're con women.
Yeah, absolutely. And they totally did the bait and switch that, I mean, I've heard countless amounts of stories of that happening to women now with medical midwives, but yeah, they were like, okay, we'll do our best, and sure.
We'll try not to give you a vaginal exam. That's disgusting.
Yeah, I know. And of course, like in retrospect, none of it makes any sense to me now. It's like, that was just ridiculous. But I went into labor. It was like around 2 a.m. I started to like wake up and couldn't go back to sleep with definite sensations. It was the day before the summer solstice. My second born is a summer solstice baby. And I was super nervous because it was my first time going into labor on my own. And by like 6 a.m., I had like woken up my husband and been like, this is definitely happening. Should we call them? Like, who are we calling right now? Are we going to call the doula? Are we going to call the midwives? When? And so we decided to call all of them at like 6 a.m. and just like tell them that it was definitely happening and at least give them a heads up. And the midwives, basically were like, oh, you've only been laboring for 5 hours. call us later and hung up because it was 6 a.m. and they had their own kids and their own families and their own lives to think about. And if, it wasn't happening immediately, they weren't really interested in hearing about it, which was also, I remember finding that kind of startling because I expected these women to care about me being in labor.
It's as if that's what you hired them for.
Yeah. And they clearly didn't, unless it was imminent. So my doula came over a couple of hours later and we just labored around the house, and I walked up and down the street a little bit, which felt more private to me at the time than being in my house with people watching me. Like even just my doula, I liked her a lot, and we still talk, and I still really felt like her presence was very supportive, external to the midwives. But eventually the midwives showed up, and it was the two of them, and one of them had a 4-month-old baby who she told me was going to be present at the birth. And I felt guilty, I'm a mom, how could I tell you, I don't understand that your breastfeeding baby needs to be there because you'll be there for however long. And I just was like, yeah, that's reasonable. And I didn't want to say anything to her, so I just sort of acted like that was normal. And she also brought her teenage daughter to help her watch the baby, which she did not tell me was going to be happening. So when they showed up, and my house was fairly small at the time, they took over my entire living room. It was 3 adult women, my 2 midwives and my doula, her teenage daughter, and her 4-month-old baby. Wow. All literally occupying the entire shared space of the whole house. And I just went and hid in my room. I didn't know what else to do. I was so overwhelmed. And her teenage daughter is watching me labor naked. I'm don't even know this girl at all. God. It was so awkward and uncomfortable and totally threw me off because of course that would throw you off. And I was so anxious already, and I was so nauseous during that labor because I was so anxious. And I just literally went and hid in my bedroom and tried to pretend that nobody was there, but I could hear everybody out there. And at some point in the day, my older son, who was just 2 at the time, just started to lose it. And I think it was really just being thrown off by all the people in our house that he didn't know. And my husband didn't know what to do anymore because he was trying to be with me, and the baby was totally freaking out. And I just ended up calling my mother. I didn't even want her to know I was in labor that time because I was afraid she was just going to show up at my house. And my husband thankfully set a very clear expectation for her to come, and he was going to bring my son out to her, and she was going to bring him to her house. And so that happened at some point in the day, which I really needed to happen because his totally losing it was very much affecting my energy, as of course it would.
You'd also think with that many adults, the doula would have taken him outside and taken him on a nature walk and gotten his shit together. But
yeah,
just a real great team here.
So yeah, basically, eventually what happened was they asked to check me, even though I didn't want cervical checks at all. I was 6 centimeters, and she told me that his head was engaging crooked. And so that brought me to my first birth, because that's what they told me. That's why my first baby's heart rate went out in my first birth. That's what they said.
It's not. No.
So I was like, oh no, it's happening again. And I just started spiraling again. Oh no, it's happening again. This is just my body. It's just the way that I carry my babies. It's got to be something wrong with my anatomy, and it's just the way that it's going to be. And I ended up very exhausted and wasn't making it past 6 centimeters, and decided to go to the hospital for an epidural. And really in my mind, I was like, I just need to get the F out of here. because I cannot be with these people anymore. And I don't even know what to do. Like, I feel like I can't ask them to leave, and I just like don't even know what to do. So we went to the hospital. I got an epidural. As soon as they did a cervical check after the epidural, I was 10 centimeters. Like, in the literal time that I drove to the hospital, just being away from all of them, I had progressed almost all the way at that point. But I had already brought myself to the hospital. So it was kind of what it was. And they did coach pushing again. This time it was a different hospital because the midwives told me to go to a hospital that was like more accepting of home birth transfers. Like, they were less likely to be judgmental, according to the other people that they had worked with.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a different hospital, and they were somewhat nicer. And I feel like their practices were like a little more mother baby centered, but you know, it's still grasping at straws. So like, it's still crumbs that they're feeding you.
But you also had a C-section.
Yeah. So I pushed for 3 hours and nothing happened, and he didn't descend at all. And they were like, okay, you tried. Time for
Right.
another.
There's nothing mother baby centered about
Yeah.
that. That is a total like
Yeah,
bullshit
it's
concept. In
just more
hospitals.
smoke and mirrors kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Like, you think that that's what you're getting, but you're not.
So after 3 hours, someone called it, and
Yeah, the doctor came in and they were just like, he hasn't moved at all. He's like still at whatever 0 position, and you've pushed for 3 hours and he hasn't changed position at all. So it's just, you tried.
brutal.
Nice trying, but it's time for another C-section, which was really hard. Really, really, really hard to face and accept.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I feel like I had already like known that that was what I was going to the hospital for. In my own like internal monologue, I was just like, that's what I'm here for. Like, I'm done. I had checked out mentally before I had gone into the hospital. Like, that was already my last, like, all right, let's just go and have surgery. And I went through the motions of the rest of it because I just, you know, I wanted to try, but I knew I was there for another C-section. Wow. Which is what ended up happening. And it was different and also very similar. He was a much bigger baby. My first son was 6 pounds, 15 ounces. And I was like, all of you told me he was going to be big and I was post-dates and blah, blah, blah. And you were wrong. Clearly he wasn't ready, like I said. My second son was 9 pounds. And so of course they were all like, well, that's why he didn't come out. That's why he didn't come down. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And I was like, okay, whatever.
I wonder what it feels like to lie so much.
I wonder if they think that they are sometimes.
No.
I don't even know.
No, I don't think. It's like they're so caught up in the indoctrination. It's just stuff you say. Yeah. But it's lies. It's all lies. It's just so wild. Okay.
I mean, I'm sure they see 9-pound babies born all the time, right?
Oh, exactly.
So like, obviously it's not just me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So is this the time? When do you take RBK? It's before your first free birth.
The following year. Yeah. So he was born in 2019 in the summer, and then actually maybe 2 years after that.
But you have your third baby after RBK.
Yes.
Right?
I got pregnant with him right at the end of RBK, because you remember during RBK, I had a miscarriage.
Yes.
I had an early loss.
Yes, I do remember
and that I consider my first free birth, because it was really like I felt like that spirit baby came to me as like the testing ground.
Totally.
And I was like, okay, this is it. Am I gonna practice what I preach now? Or am I still orienting from fear? And that was when I like really knew, like, no, I do trust my body. And it did happen. I had an early pregnancy loss physiologically at home, no complications, nothing to be scared of. And I was like, my body is not broken. This is my sign. This is, you know, from the universe, my sign telling me that it's not something wrong with me. And that really gave me a lot of confidence
Because of course,
Yeah.
if you wanted to see a miscarriage as an expression of you being broken, if that's what the script you're looking to prove, you could have, right? But because of your deep work and your like sincere curiosity about how to do it differently, you were willing to take on a different script when you experience that, which is just really important, I think, for everyone listening, as a reminder. Like we believe, we see what we believe, right? Like getting our thoughts right and being open to something different is the discipline, because otherwise we're just like repeating scripts unconsciously constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so after that, I was just like a totally different person after that. I had multiple years of listening to Freebirth stories, thanks to your fantastic podcast. And I had gone through RBK and like fully unpacked everything that had happened before, and just like really looked at how all of my choices had been just orienting from, things that I was afraid of and things that I felt guilty about not doing also, and like wanting to be seen as like credible and intelligent, and feeling like making alternative choices like meant that people would think that I wasn't smart anymore.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so I got pregnant again the first cycle after my like miscarriage had fully completed, which was like several months afterwards, but right at the end of RBK. And I was like 5 weeks pregnant that summer when I came to Matriarch Rising. 5 weeks pregnant at that point, like right at the beginning. And that pregnancy was like so different. I was fully committed to having a wild pregnancy. I was not going to be going back into the system. I knew that they didn't have anything that I wanted there anymore. I had an experience with medical midwives. I knew that they didn't have anything that I wanted either. And it was like the most relaxing, calming, like that's honestly like my favorite part of choosing wild pregnancies, is just like you just live life. There's nothing to be like, there's no fears being dripped into your brain by all of these people, and there's no anxiety because you're testing all of these things, and it's just life. And then you have a baby, and that's the best thing about it to me.
Yeah.
But fast forwarding to his birth, after a really, really normal, super uncomplicated pregnancy, I went into labor again at 2 a.m. Actually, it's the same time I went into labor this time too. It's always at 2 a.m. I just like wake up and I'm clearly having contractions. And I had created like a little birth cave in my bathroom. I had put like a bed in because it was big enough to have a bed in the bathroom.
Fun.
And I wanted to like not have to like walk from the bathroom to like my bed and all of that. And I had my, my affirmation cards that I got from your site, like strung up on little strings everywhere. And it was really sweet. And so I just labored in my cave. I did my thing. And it was really calm. And it feel like built in intensity, like pretty steadily. And mostly I like kneeled on the bed that I had set up, or like switched from there to like the toilet, because that was where I was most comfortable to like really relax and like let all my muscles just go, so that I didn't have to worry about making a mess. It's always like in the back of my mind, making a mess everywhere, like dripping stuff everywhere is like always like, for some reason, mess making is always in the back of my mind during labor. But
just birth, or like in general in your life?
Yeah, I guess it definitely comes up in other places in life, but I feel like birth is particularly messy, I guess. So it comes up more, can be, because it wasn't for this last time. But yeah, at some point I like gagged and was like, is that transition? Maybe. And I was like, oftentimes throwing up is associated with like being fully dilated, and that was curious. So I was like, ooh, I think I'm getting somewhere. And then the sensations really started to switch to really bearing down. And I really hated that feeling. It was so weird.
Totally.
Like throwing up in reverse, so bizarre.
Not great.
I was just like, oh,
I know
this is
women
what
will
this
talk
feels
about like
like.
loving that stage. I'm like,
No,
really?
that's
Huh.
like the hardest part for me. I could do early labor for like
Well,
ever.
duh.
I feel like forever. It wouldn't bother me. As soon as the bearing down part starts, I'm like, oh God, please, I'm just done with this. But I wasn't tracking time like at all. I was just in my zone. I had music on, and I had bearing down sensations, pushing contractions for like a while. I know it was at least a few hours, but I wasn't really paying attention. And I was just vocalizing through them. And my husband was like in and out. At some point, it was morning time. And so the kids woke up and he had to go take care of them, and kept coming back to check on me. And at some point, I started really feeling a lot of pressure. And I was like, this is what people talk about. Because I didn't feel any of that. Like, even when I was pushing with my second son, I had the epidural, so I didn't feel anything.
Not just that, but both times, because this is how it goes, they were having you push before you were actually ready to push. In the system, 10 centimeters is time to push, which is
Right.
so dumb and not at all how birth actually works.
No. So it was really nice to kind of like ease into that. And like it was really gradual and gradually increased. And when I really started feeling like that, oh no, am I going to poop feeling, I decided to reach in, and I felt my sac bulging. And then as I like felt around with it, it burst like all over my hand. I was like, that was cool. And then I felt his head after that. And I remember a friend of mine had told me she had birthed with an RBK, and had told me that like that feeling of like feeling the baby's head, and like how she still like rubs that spot on her baby's head like all the time and remembers his birth. And I thought of that in that moment and was like, I'm going to remember this.
Cute.
I'm going to remember this forever. And a few more pushing contractions, and he was crowning, and I was so ready for it to be done at that point, because that sensation was extremely intense for me, extremely intense. And I do remember, like you said, like some women love that, and I cannot understand.
Both times so far, I've like begged my husband, like, can you just grab him? Can you just do something? Just get him out.
Like, I don't understand how that's pleasurable.
That's
for anybody,
amazing.
but
I do not
yeah.
either. Hey, maybe someday.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of hoped that it would be this next time. It still wasn't really, but
I think we'd have to like do more than just hope.
yeah, probably.
I don't know what it is. Apparently Yolanda does.
So yeah, he crowned, and then I pushed with my body because I was like, I'm over this. And his head came all the way out, and I was like, can you see him? To my husband, and he was like, I see him. And then the next push, his whole body came out with like a huge gush of blood. And like at the same time, my older kids like came around the corner and peeked into the bathroom. And my oldest son was like, no to the blood, and wouldn't come in the room. And I was like, it's okay. Everything is normal. This is okay. Like, mommy is fine. And my second oldest was all about it. Came right in, like, wanted to see the baby, did not care about any of it. And I laid down, and then like immediately felt more pressure, sat back up again, and like put a tiny bit of traction on the cord, and placenta slid right out. which I was super nervous about because I had all these stories about scar tissue from C-sections and excessive bleeding and postpartum hemorrhage. And I made sure that I had shepherd's purse and Angelica tincture, like just in case. I didn't end up using anything except Chuck's pads. And he was here and he was great and he was perfect. And it was kind of crazy. I just, had a baby and it was a regular day and there was no chaos and there was no trauma and there was no, sabotage and all of that. So fast forwarding again, because I want to tell the whole other story, even though it's not very long, but I was a totally different person again after that birth. And went into my second wild pregnancy, just like, again, it's just life. It's just normal. It's just every single day is just normal family life. And it's kind of perfect. Amazing to just have absolutely no external stress and pressure put on you when you're pregnant. I think that people think that pregnancy is inherently a stressful time. And I really feel personally that has so much more to do with who you're seeing for your pregnancy than inherent to the state of pregnancy. But at the end of this most recent pregnancy, I was convinced that, of course, all my other babies came after, 40 weeks, around 41 weeks. So I was like, it's 39 weeks. I don't have to think about this. I'm just going to do my prepping stuff. I'm going to have some food in the freezer and, whatever. Definitely have 2 more weeks. And then one night in the middle of the night, I woke up with this weird pressure and it didn't feel like cramping or contractions at all. It was just when baby's head really presses hard against your pubic bone. That's what it felt like. And for some reason, I got it in my brain that this was gas pain. It felt kind of like being constipated, I guess. So I was just I don't know, I'm uncomfortable. This must be gas pain. I'm not going to think about it. I was up and I went to the bathroom, and so basically I ended up.
But also in your mind, it can't be it's not labor.
I was totally I'm 39 weeks. There's no way. There's no way.
It's funny how we just make stuff up.
Yeah. And honestly, I'm kind of grateful for that now because I feel like it gave me space in my mind to experience it differently. Because I feel when this is labor and these are definitely contractions, sometimes where you are in your brain really makes it a lot more uncomfortable sooner because you're just focusing on it. I got super hyper focused on every single contraction with my previous labors, and I feel that made it way more uncomfortable and way more painful in the end. And so this time I from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. I just kept going back and forth to the bathroom with this weird pressure that kept coming and going, and I was I don't know what this is. I guess I'm just hoping that eventually I go to the bathroom and it goes away and I can go to sleep because I'm tired and I'm 39 weeks and I don't want to be up anymore. And then by 6 o'clock, I was it's not going away. I'm exhausted. And I went and woke up my husband, who was in our toddler's bedroom, because he was up all night that night. He must have felt something. He must have felt that energetic shift. And I had a sensation in the bedroom when I was waking up my husband, and I had to kneel on the floor for the first time. And I was I don't know what's happening. I don't think this is labor. It can't be labor. It doesn't feel anything like that. And I just blah, 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 blah. And he was I think you're in labor. You're kneeling on the floor. Having a contraction.
When else do you do this?
Yeah, he was I'm pretty sure you're in labor.
That's
I was
cute.
but nothing's happening. I haven't lost a mucus plug. Nothing's happening. And so we went into the bathroom and I had a couple more of these pressure sensations while I was sitting on the toilet, and they were definitely getting a little more intense, but like still, I would describe it as moderately uncomfortable. Still like absolutely nothing like anything I'd felt before. And then at some point I ended up wiping because I was checking a lot because I was like, I don't know what's happening anymore. I need a sign. Give me a sign. And there was like a tiny bit of like pink discharge on the toilet paper. And I was like, it's really something. Something's happening. But of course I thought it was like super early still because it wasn't intense at all.
Oh my God. Okay, give us the timestamp of when is it actually?
So that was like 6:05 a.m.
And
I
then
had
when's
just
baby born?
gone and got him. 6:45 a.m. Yeah. Yeah. So he literally like walked out of the room because one of the kids woke up. And I like was like, okay, I'm in labor. Grab a Chex pad, put it on the floor, kneel over it. The next sensation, still very bearable. My water burst all over the Chex pad. And I was like, oh, like this is definitely happening. We're really having a baby right now.
Whoa.
And he came back in and I was like, my water just broke. And he was like, okay, like, what do you want to do? And we had bought a birth tub this time because I really had like a water birth in my mind this time because I hadn't had the chance to do it and I really wanted to. And he was like, should I set up the tub? And I was like, no, fill the regular bathtub.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, there's no way. We don't have time for that. So he starts filling the bathtub. I get in the bathtub, a few more sensations while I'm like crouched there. He has to leave again because the toddler wakes up. And he comes back. And I literally in one sensation felt like the baby's head all the way up and then all the way almost to crowning. And I was like,
God. Oh my God.
What's happening right now?
Crazy.
What is happening right now? My water broke 12 minutes before that.
5 seconds.
Literally, it was crazy. And I was like, I can feel his head. And I was like, do you want to feel it? And he was like, yeah. So he felt like the top of the baby's head that time.
Cute.
And then he had to leave again because one of the kids needed him.
Whatever, you're fine.
And he was really, he was like not at all expecting that this was about to happen. He was thinking, it's definitely, I've got time. So he leaves. And on the next sensation, I'm like, oh no, like this is crowning. So I'm by myself in the bathtub. I like actively like stopped myself. I like paused for a minute and like really like took a deep breath and recentered because that moment with my previous son like was just so intense and I like pushed through it and I definitely like tore a tiny bit. I could have obviously torn just because, tearing happens, but I felt like I pushed too hard because I wanted that crowning sensation to be over. Yeah. And so this time I was like, breathe, take a minute, breathe. I know you hate how this feels, but like he's really coming out right now. And I paused and then I worked with the next pushing contraction and his head came out and there was like a very brief pause, not even like the contraction didn't finish. It was kind of like they were just back to back. Like there was no actual like break. It was just like a pause. And then I felt it again and I pushed the rest of his body out and he like slid right into my hands in the water. And I brought him up and I held him and I looked and he had so much vernix. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I don't feel like any of them have had, the first two it was wiped off. I didn't know if they had a lot of vernix or not.
But he was a couple weeks younger.
Yeah, and I was just like, oh my God, he's like covered in vernix. I've never seen this before. And he immediately like made some noise. Didn't cry too hard, but he was obviously well. He was great.
Your fourth boy.
My fourth, and then I checked to make sure it was definitely another boy, and it was.
That's wild.
And then my husband comes around the corner, and peeks around the door, and like his face was just like, "What just happened?" Wow. And I was like, "He's here."
Wow.
And he immediately like grabbed the phone and went to take pictures because last time we didn't get a lot of like nice pictures and I really wanted nice pictures this time. It's probably our last baby.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
But he was good. He took pictures when I wanted him to. And we also had to use that to figure out when he was born because I was by myself and I didn't know what the heck was happening. So I didn't
God.
know the time. But yeah,
Just
it was
like your articulation of that first birth versus this one, just like, wow, what a arc
yeah.
to go through.
Yeah. It feels, I mean, obviously momentous because I feel like I'm not just a different person. I feel like I'm like 4 different people on
And
a
like
journey.
imagine if you had just kept having C-sections, like who you would be,
I know.
because that's
I
the
know.
norm. Especially after a second C-section, a lot of medical providers don't touch a VBAC with a third.
Yeah.
It's just like such a sentence in obstetrics. And what a completely different like mother you would be if you didn't get to learn. I don't even know if learn's the right word. Like you just get to experience what birth is.
Yeah. And the journey to like trusting myself, like
Right.
so implicitly, which I never would have gotten had I just continued to say, okay, scheduled C-sections from now on. And it's not like it wasn't tempting. Like it was absolutely tempting because, it's scary. Birth is huge. It's huge. No matter what, it's huge. And so I thought about it and I just knew it was never going to be the right path for me. I knew that I had to have these experiences. I wanted to experience birth.
Yeah.
I wanted to feel birth because I felt like I hadn't birthed when I had C-sections. And I was just like, I need, exactly.
That's true.
Absolutely. And that's 100% how I feel. That's like not birth, but yeah.
I mean, I guess, yeah, that's like an interesting choice of words because it's like, it's not biological birth, but it is a birth experience, right? Like it is your son's birth story. So it is a birth. I think sister calls it birth by knife. It's like, of course it's a birth experience, but it's not natural birth.
Yeah.
Oh,
And it didn't feel like it to me, for sure.
Of course.
It didn't feel like it.
And terrible. And it's so painful, like that it was completely just being a victim of the system and not knowing, not being none the wiser, or whatever the expression is. It's not like almost all surgical stories, it wasn't necessary. It wasn't life-saving. It wasn't any of that.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like the assembly line because this is what happens.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to ask you is, just because we didn't really get to it, in between the second surgery and then free birth, and like I know you found the podcast and all of that, but like what is there anything you want to articulate about how you knew you were going to do it this way that then you go on to do? And I understand once you've done it, it's like this is just who you are. It's I've thought this a lot lately, and it's like, taken out of context, it could sound really insensitive. And obviously that's not how I mean it, but like it's true that an embodied mother doesn't surrender herself and her child to institutions. You just don't, once you have self-authority and autonomy and embodiment anyway. But like, so what happens for you is, I think for a lot of C-section moms turn FBAC, it's like there's a gift in it of being like, I've seen what they have to offer and it's evil, like I don't want that. It's no longer tempting. Whereas a woman who has like a fine-ish birth, it can stay kind of tempting, but having, repeat C-sections is like, fuck. But anyway, yeah, just anything you want to say about really kicking it into this other gear that's like, yeah, I'm going to do something that almost no one does. That's incredibly rogue, incredibly fringe, and yet it's so obvious that that's what you'll do.
Yeah. I think for me, the biggest thing besides just learning more and realizing how absolutely unnecessary everything that I had experienced in the medical system was just that I knew that I could never, for me personally, I could never surrender to that level of embodiment that birth requires with people observing me.
Yeah.
And so I could tell that all of the additional energy of everybody that had been present in the first and second, births was really like, it just totally threw me off. Like I could feel it like, attaching to my energy field, honestly. And I knew that if I was ever going to have a chance, if I was ever going to have even a little bit of a chance to have a vaginal birth, I needed to do it alone. It was just the only way that I knew that I could get there myself, for a lot of reasons, because of like people pleasing programming and conditioning and relationship dynamics with authority figures being really complicated for me. I knew that I would always mentally position anybody who was like a birth expert in my space as like an authority. And I knew that I would want to please them. And I knew that I would sacrifice what I wanted to do so. And I learned that from the two experiences that I had was like, no matter how much information I had brought into it, I knew that was just like, the information wasn't going to stop those patterns from playing out. And I had to just like go all the way. And that's kind of how I am as a person.
Go
like,
all the
I'm
way.
just kind of like 0 or 100.
Well, anyway. You tried the other ways.
And I did. And I like gave it a good shot, right? I tried the medical midwife. I did the thing. And it still didn't work.
Brings her children.
Yeah. And I was just like, I just was never going to put myself in a position where I was going to let somebody else sabotage me again. Yeah. And I knew that I had chosen that. Like I wasn't just a victim to the system. I was, and also I chose it. And I knew I wasn't in alignment with it. And I could feel that it wasn't right for me. And I was still
that's afraid. The part that I think is really important, because I don't think it's totally fair to say like you chose the entirety of your experience, because you didn't totally understand what you were agreeing to, and you didn't, it gets a little tricky with the victim dynamics, because it is a predatory system. It is. And also that piece that you just said around like the signposts on your journey where you betrayed yourself, that's what you can really own and explore and take responsibility for and do differently. And of course that leads you to sovereign birth and a ton of other stuff in your life. And I think that's an important and kind of a nuanced like arena, right? Because I see a lot of women think they're taking responsibility for their horrific abusive births, but you know what I mean? Like, no, you don't take responsibility for your rape.
Of course not.
Well, right. But it's the same.
Right. Yeah.
But you can, if you choose to, there's no obligation to do this, but you can look at where you ignored your red flags, where something felt uneasy and you didn't tend to it. Like, yes, for sure. That's all within our, like, what is ours? It's kind of a complicated conversation, but I do think it's an interesting difference.
Yeah. And that's definitely like, that was the commitment that I feel like I made to myself between my second C-section and my free births was, I am not going to betray myself again. I know what that feels like. I know where it gets me. And I'm not doing it anymore. I am not willing to do that anymore. I'm going to trust myself, even if it seems crazy, because I know it's right for me.
Yeah.
And it just is what it is.
Yeah. Suck it.
And where that's taken me, is like,
it's liberation, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't change it for anything.
Thank you so much. I loved this story.
Thank you for hosting me.
I hope you enjoyed the show today. You can support this podcast by donating to it on freebirthsociety.com and leaving an awesome review on whatever platform you listen on. The more reviews, the more visibility the show gets, so let's spread the word of sovereign birth. We've always got a lot going on at Free Birth Society, and you can find out about all of it at freebirthsociety.com, at Free Birth Society on Instagram, and opt in to my newsletter below in the show notes. We offer courses on free birth, authentic midwifery, and the blood mysteries, as well as one-on-one coaching, in-person retreats, and of course, our annual Women's Festival. Our exclusive, vetted, private membership is definitely something to check out if you're looking for a community of wise sisters. Together we rise. We must speak our stories, claim our lives, and support one another. This is the living revolution, and I am so grateful to be in it with all of you. I'll leave you with our epic Free Birth Society theme song, Wild Woman by Aruba Red.
I honor you for the wisdom you held, the ancient traditions of plant medicine and womb magic. I feel the spirit of the ancestors as I place my hands upon my belly. This sacred portal will be honored. Eons upon light beams of survival, withstanding the eradication of our power by design. I will not allow the separation of our young to be forced upon me. My sisters will no longer birth in captivity. The picket line redefined from burning our wild women to paralyzing us and drugging our babes. Strapped down in a clinical white bed, drying up the milk from our breasts. Keep your needles. My family will never again be doomed to chase those dragons or your poison. We reject your fear. We choose love. Everything with intention. Death, ascension. I will fly and bring her back